Breaking news, a dramatic U.S.-led escalation in the Caribbean. What the Navy calls the largest warship ever built, along with fighter jets, heading to the waters off Latin America. The administration claims the goal is to stop international drug traffickers. The provocative move comes as the Pentagon announced another overnight strike on a suspected drug boat. The 10th strike in 52 days. At least 43 people killed in total. And President Trump telling reporters these attacks may just be the tip of the iceberg.
I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay, we're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead.
And CNN is reporting tonight that the president is considering plans to target cocaine facilities inside Venezuela. Now, the lack of transparency about these plans, especially the deadly attacks on alleged drug boats, have an increasing number of Republicans doing something they don't do much these days, criticizing the Trump White House.
The administration needs to give insight into Congress. That's part of it. If this was happening with this level of insight under the Biden administration, I'd be apoplectic.
And as tensions spike across the Caribbean, President Trump is now just hours away from leaving for a high-stakes trip to Asia, where he's scheduled to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping. Their first meeting since President Trump was reelected, and it comes as U.S.-China relations are now at their lowest point in years. Kristen Holmes is out front live at the White House. Kristen, the president has been focused very much on these strikes in the Caribbean, but he is about to have one of the most important meetings of his second term in Asia.
Yeah, there is a lot internationally going on for the president as he embarks on this trip. And just to dive into what's happening in the Caribbean, I mean, you mentioned this warship, these fighter jets. All of this really represents a potentially massive military escalation. I mean, this is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening at the same time. President Trump has confirmed that the CIA is operating in Venezuela. He has said a number of times and increased the rhetoric around the idea of land strikes in Venezuela. Now, of course, we have reported that all of this is part of a broader strategy to eventually oust Maduro. But White House officials say the president is considering a number of options. One of them you mentioned was this targeting of cocaine facilities. I do have to note, I mean, Venezuela is not known as a major source of cocaine. So that's just something to keep in mind as the administration has tried to link Maduro to these drug trades. The other one that they were considering is striking actual drug trafficking routes. But again, President Trump has not made any decisions. And we should say that while these escalations, these tensions are rising in one region, there is a lot of hope that President Trump's trip to Asia is going to help de-escalate tensions in another, particularly that relationship with China. I mean, we have been in what we've all been a part of, this kind of back and forth trade war since President Trump was sworn into office. The relationship between China and the U.S. is at an all-time low, and there are a lot of people who are deeply concerned that we are on the wrong track and that we're going to lose other allies in the region who want to trade with China. So this is an opportunity for President Trump to work with those allies as well as to sit down face to face with President Xi. But Dana, I'll tell you, they are really trying to manage expectations on that sit down. Maybe they learned from the sit down with Vladimir Putin in Alaska that they shouldn't get ahead of their skis.
Yeah, I'm guessing there's a lot to learn there. Kristen, thanks so much for your reporting. Appreciate it. Fareed, it's so good to see you. What do you think, let's start in the Caribbean, where I just left off. What do you think of this massive military buildup? Is it really about drug trafficking or about trying to force regime change in Venezuela, or both?
Dana, you're focusing on the right issue. It is a massive buildup and a massive escalation. Look, we probably now have more troops in that area, in that region, the Caribbean and Latin America, naval troops than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Wow.
You're talking about 10,000 American troops, 9 major carriers. And it is unclear what the purpose is, because the ostensible purpose, as you say, is all about drugs. Mm-hmm. But as one of your previous guests was saying, Venezuela is not the font of all the drug trafficking coming into the United States. Mm-hmm. It's a terrible regime, make no mistake, and Maduro is a terrible guy. But if this is an effort at regime change, it would be very important to have thought through the entire sequence of events that are going to take place, how this is going to work out, Donald Trump, in many ways, came to power breaking with Republican orthodoxy by pointing out that the Iraq War had been a fiasco, by pointing out that the Libyan intervention had been a fiasco. He had been initially, in very Donald Trump-like way, he had been in favor of the intervention, sort of, and then when it turned sour, he said the Libyan intervention was a mistake and Gaddafi should have stayed in power. All of which is to just say, if there is a move toward regime change, if this is some kind of a quiet or escalating war to get Maduro out of power, you'd want to have thought through the day after, the week after, the month after, because Venezuela could easily collapse into chaos. And then, you know, if you think we have seen a lot of Venezuelan migrants, we ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah. You know, it's so interesting and important that you say that, because I was thinking about that same dynamic, that this is a man who has been saying, I want to end wars, I want things to calm down. And it's not necessarily definitive that he's trying to start a war. It could be a show of force. It could be a lot of different things, and moving such a huge military presence into the Caribbean. But is there evidence that those steps that you're describing the day after, or what would happen if Maduro is actually overthrown, or if he steps down, what would happen?
Well, we have the opposition leader, Machado, who just won the Nobel Prize and who's been very supportive of Trump, and you know, in fact, said she dedicated the prize to him, which was all a very clever political way of keeping him engaged and supportive. You know, but just remember, there's always in these regimes, I mean, this is what we learned in Iraq, in Afghanistan, there's always still the remnants of the old regime, the army, the secret police, who are going to mount an assault on whatever new government comes into power. There will be a kind of civil war there. Have we thought all that through? I wonder, by the way, Dana, if this is part of the reason Admiral Halsey, the ranking admiral, resigned in a slightly mysterious way, that he felt like perhaps there was some of this escalation taking place without without thinking it through. I'm not sure, of course, I'm speculating, but it was a very strange and abrupt resignation.
Let's turn to China, and more broadly, the Asia trip that the president is about to take. It's a very high-stakes meeting that he is going to have with President Xi. And you say the bullying approach that President Trump has used to get his way won't necessarily work with China for a very specific reason. What is it?
Well, you know, Trump actually is very smart about understanding when he has leverage and when he doesn't. So with a place like Venezuela, a small country, poor country, the U.S. is vastly more powerful militarily. He knows he can push. With China, he has been very careful. Every time he's escalated and the Chinese have pushed back, he's backed down. He did it after the Liberation Day. He's done it more recently. So I think he understands that the Chinese have a lot of cards as well, and that they can play them. And the Chinese regime is almost set up for this kind of thing better than almost any other regime in the world. They are willing to take the pain. They are willing to inflict pain on their people. You know, they have an economy that they are developing consciously to be more decoupled and less integrated with the West. So in some ways, some of this actually plays into the book that Xi Jinping is trying to play anyway. I think Trump knows this, and that's why he's not escalating willy-nilly with the Chinese.